The Mark 8 Golf R is equipped with a drift mode. Now I know what you're thinking, the Focus RS already did it and hitting a button is not building a drift car. Well, you may be right. It could be a gimmick, it might not even work, but there's only one way to find out. Drifting is a driving technique where the driver intentionally oversteers the car with a loss of traction, but also maintains control through a corner. So much so that the front wheels are often pointing in the opposite direction of the turn. Think about your car turning left while your front wheels are pointed right. The majority of drift cars that you'll see are rear-wheel drive manual transmission cars that also have a few extra modifications, including an additional emergency brake for the rear wheels, an angle kit for the front steering to allow the wheels to turn beyond what they would from the factory. Often the weight of the car is reduced as well as power increased. The suspension is also generally modified, and the most common thing, a whole bunch of extra tires. While you don't need all of those things, there's a whole bunch more that can go into building a proper drift car. The Golf R is a front-wheel bias, all-wheel drive car that can send up to 50% of power to the rear wheels. With the new torque splitting diff, that power sent to the rear wheels can be split 100% left or 100% right. When drift mode is active, the car sends the majority of the power of the rear wheels to the outside wheel. So if we're turning left, it's going to power the right rear wheel the most, up until the point the car starts to drift. I've been so impressed with just how amazing the Mark 8 Golf R is. The car has multiple personalities in the best possible way. So I'm going to head down to Import Alliance in Atlanta, and we're going to try and throw this car sideways. I also can't wait to see the look on people's face when we show up to a drift event with a brand new all-wheel drive car. So before we get the Mark 8 out and drift it, it's probably going to be important to gain a little bit of experience in a car built to drift. So Dan, this is Dan. He's gonna take me on a couple laps, show me the course, then we're gonna jump in the 8 and see how it does. Let's go. This is a drift car with no drift button. Can you drift without a button?
This is like technically a drift button, sort of.
So this is the mechanical drift button.
Mechanical drift.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're like right on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that was awesome. Super fun, very slidey. I don't know how he did it without having a drift button. Next up, it's time to jump in the 8 and see what we can do. Drift mode is sort of hidden in the mode menus. In order to access it, you have to go to Race. That opens up two special options, Drift and Nürburgring mode. Select Drift. This is intended for closed driving tracks and should only be used by a driver that has appropriate skills. Even though I don't have any of that, we are going to select it anyway. So fun fact, drift mode keeps traction control on. Let's try it again.
So it turns out you got to turn traction control on.
Well, what do you think?
It's actually fairly impressive. Like, it's not really drifting, but it is a good party. Like, it's good to have that button to have some fun. I think with a little bit of practice, he could probably link this whole course, no problem. It's pretty sick.
Well, did we prove that the MK8 can actually drift? I don't know. We did, however, prove that it does power slide. We also proved that that is incredibly fun, and if you look at the tire, look at that baby. So we did something. We got some smoke, we got some slide. Either way, super fun time. I don't think you could ever do that in a Mark 7, which makes this car yet again incredibly awesome. Something else that I wanted to do during this drift event was really extract some data to see what the car's actually doing. We can talk about powering the outer wheel up to a drift all we want, but I like to actually see what's happening with the car. Unfortunately, we had some scan tool issues at the track, so I did my best to recreate what's happening. What we're looking at here is a graph of vehicle wheel speed, all 4 wheels. I started out with basically doing a locked left turn to go in a circle. And as you can see, the wheel speeds are pretty consistent with the inner wheels, both left wheels, red and yellow, on the graph being a little bit slower than the outer wheels. What's really interesting is at the point where the car starts to slide, if you look at the yellow line, you can see it sort of slowing down a little bit, so it's a little lower on the graph, and then a somewhat drastic drop in speed. This is most likely the car braking that left inner wheel just as the car begins to slide. Something else that I was trying to look at was to see if we could see activation of the left torque splitting module and the right torque splitting module as we slide the car back and forth to see if we could visually see, hey, I'm actually applying this much percentage of power to that outer wheel to encourage a drift. I could never actually find a place where we could easily see that, but I did find a few spots where you can kind of see the full activation of what's going on here, where these numbers are all at their highest point. There is probably a way we could extrapolate that into actually determining specified clutch torque and then the angle as well. The big thing I think that you could probably look at would be this one right here, control module for torque distribution current consumption. Of course, the more current that motor is consuming, the more that clutch is going to be active, which means the more power to that specific wheel. The other unfortunate part is we can't look at 2 modules at the same time. So what would be ideal is if we could look at this value here for both left side and right side at the same time to see that transition when the car starts to slide, and then you kind of kick it the other way to see how the torque is transferred to that other side. Now, unfortunately, I'm not sure we're ever actually going to be able to do that. It's also really important to note that when it comes to drifting, I really have no idea what I'm doing. That's probably why when I first put the car in drift mode initially and it kept the traction control on, I couldn't actually get the car to proper drift. It was super awkward, and instead of feeling like the car was braking one wheel to help me slide, felt like it was just cutting power, preventing me from sliding. The way actual drift cars drift is either powering into a slide or doing what's called a clutch kick, basically anything to upset the chassis and encourage the car to slide around. And I think with the traction control on in that initial drift mode setting on my first run, the car was trying to prevent me from sliding. I'm sure if I were going faster, I probably could have actually gotten it to do it, but let's be honest, turning traction control off and forcing that car to slide was a whole bunch of fun too. It was such a far departure because normally I'm trying to push the car as far as I can and as hard as I can without upsetting the chassis, and in this scenario, we're trying to push it past there by forcing the car to be upset. Also important to note, in these slides, this is all power and all steering, no clutch kick and no brake activation on my part. But as we saw in that graph, with the traction control in sport, not only should the car power the outer wheel, but it'll brake the inner wheel, basically upsetting the entire car and causing it to slide. So, Big thanks to Import Alliance for actually allowing us to come out here and drift a brand new car. Danger Dan for hanging out and giving some really great instruction and taking us for a ride in a real car. I guess I'll leave you with the question, was it a drift or did we just power slide the Mark 8? With that, we're out. Have an awesome day. We'll talk to you again next time. Bye.